Hello and welcome to 5 Steps to Set Up Value Stream Management and Boost DevOps in 2021. I'm your host, Mike Bizarre, and today we have two excellent presenters. We have Jeff Keys, who's Vice President of Product for Plutora, and Helen Beal, who's Chief Ambassador for the DevOps Institute. Today there will be no less than 3 polls, so please pay attention. We need your participation to maximize the value for everybody. I also encourage you to find the Q&A buttons on your screens and ask as many questions as you like. We have 2 outstanding experts who can share all kinds of insights. And finally, if you stick around to the very end, you will be eligible for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards that we're going to be giving away. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Jeff and take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. You know, I love doing webinars together. Helen and I have been chatting about these topics for, it's getting on to be some time, but if you haven't listened to Helen, she's phenomenal. I love her background since the first day that I met her as somewhere of a cross between an analyst and a writer and industry consultant and all sorts of things. I love the experience that it brings, and that's why we've been having these. So welcome, Helen.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know what I am either, but it's lovely to be here as always. It's definitely one of the funnest parts of my life is sitting and chatting with you. So thank you for the opportunity again.
Well, I love it. And if you haven't heard other of our webinars, this webinar is actually the 4th in a series of 4. The last one we did was also a very interesting topic around leveraging value streams with scaled agile framework and where does it go and move forward from there. So, well, let's get into today. Flow of today. We're going to talk a bit about value streams, what they mean, how do you map them, what it looks like when you align your tool chain with it, and then how do you actually get value and insights out of it as you move forward. So without further ado, finding value streams, which ends up with kind of a why. Sorry, let me, before I even go here, why value streams? I remember the first time I heard the word, Helen, it felt like I don't know, another made up word that some marketing people were coming up with.
Yeah, I guess it is a bit of a buzzword, and I should probably include it in my bouncing buzzwords game at some point. But yeah, a lot of people say value chains as well, don't they? And I think it's all harking back to Toyota and Lean and the 1950s and Japan and all of that era, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And we're going to talk about flow, but we're talking about streams and that things travel along and they go on a journey. But the value part being really key, because one of the things I think we've been traditionally quite bad at being in technology and being kind of order takers is just kind of doing the job and not really thinking about the customer enough and not thinking about why we're giving what to the customer and when. So reconnecting with this concept around thinking like a value stream really helps with things like the DevOps journey, really helps people focus on the key things that they should be, i.e. the customer.
So what is a value stream?
I like to define a value stream as anything that delivers a product or a service. And again, this is kind of a fundamental kind of mind changer, because we've thought of things in such a project-oriented way, particularly in technology, for such a long time, that to actually think of the work that we do in the sense and the context of a product or service takes a little bit of a mind shift. I always used to say to people when I was doing quite a lot of consulting that what I was seeing such a lot was that people were focused on the wedding and not the marriage. So they were very focused on delivering that project, delivering that new thing, kind of forgetting that that thing that they were creating was going to exist for probably many years, maybe even many decades, and would need to be maintained and enhanced, and people would use it and they'd want different things from it, and different technologies would become available and competitors would add new features. But people were very bad about thinking in that kind of long-lived sense.
Absolutely, I love the analogy. Well, moving in, what is so if we're thinking about it as the you know the marriage versus the wedding, what's the end state that we're actually trying to get to? What are people trying to get to in their journey?
So there's kind of an organizational element here which we're looking at. So When we think of things like a project, what we tend to do is have teams of SMEs or silos of SMEs that hand off work to each other over a very extended period of time. It's usually a very extended period of time because they're working in what we call big batch. So a big batch of requirements, hundreds, if not thousands of features and things that they're trying to deliver until one massive event happens many, many months, even a couple of years down the line, when all this stuff finally becomes available to the world. And it's very painful to work in that way, as we talk often about. I mean, what are the kind of things that happen, Jeff, in that environment when we're working big batch? What are the kind of things that people experience that are painful when they work in that manner?
Oh man, it's funny. I remember the first customer I went to when I joined Plutora was a wireless communications company, and he was describing the delivery that they had with every month they were trying, well, every quarter they were trying to get to every month. They were trying to put together 300 different projects as they would deliver software, and the challenges of, well, who's got which environment, what's the quality. This one project's got a pull, but it's got dependencies on the other one. We've got a customer commit that requires an aggregation of these things. And meanwhile, the governance and risk folks were coming out of their shells, trying to make sure that things weren't going to blow up, that they weren't going to be liable, that they were following the guidelines that they commit to. What a disaster trying to coordinate that centrally, and a massive communication. They would have, just on a side note there, they would have every week a meeting with no less than, there were about 125 people that they would have between phone calls and try to get everybody that they can in a room. It was in a big room, and they would try to get everybody together to try to, coordinate what's happening. And it was just basically go around, what's the problem? It was a war room kind of mentality. Crazy.
Yeah, vast amounts of people involved to try and do probably relatively small things, but trying to do it in such a big batch of things, it becomes really complicated. So those kind of war roomy type scenarios, things like the cabs, so having change management people running change advisory or change approval boards, when they maybe don't really understand what's trying to be delivered, but they've got a checklist and they're going to make sure that the checklist is followed. So we're trying to get away from that to this place where we've got our long-lived products or our long-lived services, our value streams. What we ultimately want is those value streams to be federated or decentralized, so they're autonomous, so they don't have those dependencies that you've just described. They're able to release on demand. And that sounds like such a simple, easy phrase. They're allowed to release on demand. It's like Helen's just like made the world so easy and simple to deal with. But of course, moving from one place to another is really difficult, isn't it? I mean, how does an organization get rid of those dependencies that mean that we need to coordinate releases in this way?
Well, it's a massive shift, isn't it? Because it's not just a cultural thing. You don't just wake up one day and say, hey, we're now going to make independent teams, although I've seen that too. There's been manifestos where companies have said, we're now new ways of working, independent, small, 2 pizza teams. Well, guess what? Your technology didn't keep up with you. You've got a build process that's got this monolithic application. You got to figure out how do you segregate data, how do you divide all this stuff up. Books have been written about this, webinars have been given, lots of conversations, but this is the journey. In order to get to value streams, we have to think about a product orientation, a focus on the value delivery, and then make teams be independent. Probably one of the best jobs of doing this that I've seen personally is in my visit to Amazon. I live in the Seattle area, and to listen how on an individual buy page at Amazon, you're looking at, you might end up with 75 to 100 teams on a single page with the different independent streams of products, from the shopping cart, the catalog, the transaction, the promotions, and all the rest of it, just get displayed. And that's the way it ought to be. Help teams be independent, help teams have a goal and measure their individual value as they provide value to the customer themselves. Let's talk about that, this old way to new way. What are your thoughts on this journey? What's it look like?
I keep on talking about big batch to small batch, right? And that is kind of the foundational stone of what we're talking about here. And it's it's an organizational problem and it's a system problem. So we're trying to avoid having huge Word documents with hundreds of requirements in there and moving to a place where we've got a product backlog with very small pieces of work that we're executing very quickly. And that's a very long description for the thing that underlies that is the ability to get fast feedback, right? That's why we want to do it, because we are trying to remember, be a value stream, be focused on the value, be focused on the customer. And if we're not getting fast feedback, we don't know what we're delivering in terms of value. So that's kind of the fundamental part of it. But to get there, there's quite a lot of moving parts that we've got to almost dismantle what we've built. And I think you and I often say this when we have this conversation, that people shouldn't think, oh God, we've been doing it wrong forever. It's not that we did that. We did it the right way at the time, the best we knew at the time. But now we're learning that there are new ways. So actually we have to look at the way that we've constructed silos in our organization, and we've responded as order takers, and we've created and cost centers and created silos of people, silos of SMEs or subject matter experts. We have to look at the bureaucracy, look at all that red tape, look at all those processes that we've built. And you mentioned GRC earlier on, and the biggest generator of bureaucracy is having a problem and trying to avoid having that problem again, and putting a process in place to try and avoid having it again. And that's how it builds and builds and builds. So that's why we have things like the change people, the release people, and all these coordinated events. They're there to protect us, not to annoy us or to make our life miserable. They're there to try and stop bad things happening, but they do slow us down. So we have to find ways to unpick them. And this requires, we talked about mindset, but let's talk about leadership mindset. I mean, what do you see kind of the traditional leader looking like, and what do you see a modern leader looking like?
Well, and that's a massive shift, isn't it? The traditional leader is, if I want your opinion, I'll give it to you, kind of, it's a top down, here, I'll drive every aspect, and you're just a factory producing things. And boy, that shifted. And the rise of frankly, little mini self-operating teams that can provide more value, because the collective of the self-driven leadership is massively better. They're closer to the problem, closer to the solution, and closer to the ability to actually deliver. But the mindset difference is to now, from a corporate point of view, you have to trust that these people are good and can make that happen. I still think there's an unsung rise of the product manager that's about to be seen in corporate IT that's not been seen before, which I love. That's one of my babies of areas that I think is fantastic. Well, I think we have a poll we've got to get to, don't we? Mike, I'll turn this over to you.
All right, here we go, guys. So our poll for the moment is, do you use value stream? Sorry, I lost something there. Do you use value streams when talking about organizational structures? Please select one. We have functional SME department teams. We do design around value streams. We have product, feature, or platform teams. And we have project-based teams as an answer. And then finally, we have ARTs and value streams and teams. So please vote. And we're going to take a couple of minutes to let people do that. We're going to close out in a few seconds.
This is such a fascinating thing, the perception of folks with value streams, and what is it that we produce? Are we what exactly do we produce?
All right. Well, let's see where our answers are. We have product, feature, or platform teams comes in at first at 44%, followed by we have project-based teams at 31%. And then we're dropping down to, we have functional SME departments teams at 13%. And then we get to, we do design around value streams at 8%. And we have ARTs and value streams and teams at 5%. Guys, what do you make of that?
Helen, what's your thoughts here?
Oh, well, lots of thoughts, but the key ones that popped into my mind first were that 44% is really interesting, right? So you asked me earlier, what is a value stream? And I define a value stream as anything that delivers a product or a service. And you could, let's not get into this debate today, but service versus platform, they're kind of the same thing. So what we've got there is 44% of the audience that have teams that are centered around products or services or value streams. So whilst they may not be calling them that, they are kind of doing it as this definition evolves. Like you just said about the product manager or product owner role. You and I have this conversation again. It's not one we're planning to go into great detail today, but it's like, who is a value stream manager? Is a value stream manager a product manager or a product owner? What's the difference between product manager, product owner? And then my other thought was, we've got 5% of the audience using SAFe. So those people that said we have arts and value streams and teams are more than likely working with Scaled Agile framework, as those are those terms. But if you add we do design around value streams and arts and value streams and teams together, that 8 and 5, that is actually probably the amount of audience that is using value stream as nomenclature, a naming convention, I should say, in their organizational design. Those were my thoughts. Did you have similar ones?
Oh, absolutely. I think if we would have given this poll 2 years ago, we'd have 0% that would have said we design around value streams. And I think the number that are project-based teams would have been much higher. That's all changed now. I think the 31% that's in project-based teams is about to go through a massive transformation, because everybody is going through this project to product orientation and cultural shift, which is going to require all of this to change. So it's what's there. So moving on, let's talk about when we are moving this direction. There's sort of 4 problems that I see and read about that are the foundations of why we need to think, what happens when we think about value streams and why we need to think differently about them when we look at managing them. And the 4 problems are universal. They were always there. It just really exploited once you start thinking from a value stream kind of mentality. One is, if these teams are self-directed, you have a harder time knowing what's going on in an individual team. To be able to look at from a planning all the way through to production and into customers' hands, it's hard to see what's happening because the number of different systems and tooling and even goals that these different teams have. Operations looks to keep the systems live. Planning looks to create budgets and track that through, but being able to see it from beginning to end is really hard. Well, if you can't see what's happening on one pipeline, the second problem becomes even more apparent. You can't see what's happening at a portfolio level. If these teams are more agile and self-directed, the idea that we'll have a big boom planning phase and we'll kind of know what's happening throughout the year, well, that's not happening anymore. Teams are self-directed and they're making things happen all the time. You need to be able to see what's going across all the teams. And frankly, today, there's a massive lack of visibility for those, both at the individual pipeline and at the portfolio level. The third problem is fascinating as well. Being able to have a way of managing these, not just see, but manage them, regardless of whatever methodology or tooling that they happen to be using. One team maybe is on a more waterfall-y kind of model, another team is maybe more agile using CI/CD. How do you come up with a standardized model of managing all these regardless of their methodology? And ultimately, if you can't manage, you're not in a method of measuring anything, so you don't have a process of continuous improvement. You can't tell definitively that things are improving in a global systematic way. As the foundational problems of value stream management, what do you think of these, Helen? Do you see these problems as you are out consulting nowadays?
Absolutely. I think, if we think about how the market has evolved, and again, I'm not leveling a criticism at anybody or any organization or saying people have done stuff wrong the wrong way. It's just the reality about how this story has unfolded. And DevOps came, we started to talk about DevOps 10 years ago, and a part of that conversation is about automating the software delivery lifecycle. And there were new tools that came about that we hadn't had before. When the DevOps journey kind of began, we were just coming out of a place where the market was owned in the SDLC space by very large vendors, behemoths like IBM and HP. And then new things appeared like Puppet and Ansible and things like that started to appear, and people started to use tools in a different way. But it was all very new, and the internet meant that people were getting hold of their software in a new way, which was actually a lot better than the old way. So we've moved away from a place where salespeople were negotiating with CIOs every 3 years to sign off a massive software deal from the big vendors, and then that was set in the center, and then they try and deploy stuff out across the organization, to a place where any developer could get on the internet and download something and start using it straight away, you know, firewall rules, etc., allowing. And what that meant was the evolution of the DevOps toolchain often started with a developer in a development team experimenting and trying out something new. And it started with a bit of an artifact repository and a bit of version control, and then trying a bit of CI, and then adding some automated testing. So it was a fairly uncoordinated effort because it was experimental and we were learning. But what that means is we do end up in a place like you've described here on this diagram, where quite often enterprises have quite a variation of tool chains across different teams across an organization. And there are arguments for and against that. We do like autonomy, and we do like people to be able to choose the best tool for the job, but there are benefits to scale, not just from a licensing perspective. So as you said, that gives us problems from, if we go back to what we're trying to do with value streams, we're trying to understand what the customer needs and give it to them as fast as possible. When we've got lots of teams working in different ways with different tools, and we can't see into any of those tools, it makes it very hard for us to do that job.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, so that kind of takes us to the beginning here. It takes us to, you know, okay, so if we're going to understand our value streams, then we kind of need to start looking at how do we improve these and where do we go with them. So how do we, you know, there's an idea of in essence mapping our value streams. So what is this? How do we do it? Why do value stream mapping for our processes?
So I mentioned the 1950s and Lean and Toyota in Japan earlier on, and this is a well-established methodology from the manufacturing community that has been, and that whole Lean canon, if you like, or that body of work has been applied from manufacturing specifically to the enterprise for quite some time. It's only much more recently that we've tried to take those learnings and apply them to what we're trying to do in technology. And one of the key tools in that tool set, if you like, is value stream mapping. And for the uninitiated, value stream mapping is a visual collaboration exercise where a bunch of humans get together in a space, obviously increasingly often a virtual space, and they work together to understand where an idea comes from and the steps that that idea goes through until it becomes something usable in the hands of the customer. We've got a very simple example of a value stream on a map here on screen, but you know, I've worked with ones before where we've had upwards of 25 steps in an initial mapping. You know, if you think about the approval steps that you might take and architectural things that might go on, and boards that you might ask permission to do this, that, and the other, these value streams can end up being extremely complex. They can quite often branch as well. You can have parallelized items and things going on. But the important point is that what we often find, because of the way that we've built our enterprises as cost centers with SME-oriented silos, is that we live in our own little bubbles. So we don't see what's going on around us. We don't understand the end-to-end system flow. In DevOps, we have the three ways that many people will be familiar with, but the first way is about flow, and it's about having a deep understanding of the system of work from left to right, i.e. The value stream. So this is a tool that helps a collective group of humans understand what the customer, not the customer experience, that's a different thing, but what it takes to get the customer what they want and what everyone's involvement is. And this is one of the biggest values, I think, of the value stream mapping exercise is the human-oriented aspect of it. There's a huge empathy exercise, if you like, that goes alongside almost incidentally, where you learn about what Bob has to do in order to get an environment provisioned and why it takes 6 weeks to order some hardware and get the software installed on it and get it out of the warehouse into the data center, you know, using very old language there, but I'm sure there's plenty of people in the audience that still can't, you know, cloud native provision an environment in seconds. It's not everybody that can do that by any means these days. So yeah, that's essentially value stream mapping exercise, a bunch of people in a room.
it's fun because, if we oftentimes I'll see the question of, how do we get people started? Where do we get going? And how do I get alignment? And this really is the right way to go. Helen, we've done webinars on how do you do value stream mapping. So come look on the Plutora site. We've got some there. Helen's a great resource along those lines, and we can talk more about that. But boy, what a great cultural way to get people thinking about the whole process. So how does value stream mapping incorporate governance?
It's a great question, and I've been lucky enough to consult quite a lot in the banking, finance and insurance industries, which are really, really highly regulated, and they often, when they start delving into agile and DevOps ways of working, immediately have like a negative reaction, like a kind of almost like a force field around anything that says regulation on it. We can't do agile and DevOps with that. It's far too chaotic and not rules enough driven. So you end up having a lot of conversations about how GRC, so governance, risk and compliance, works with agile and DevOps methodologies. And I think the first point to make is that at its very core, what agile is trying to do is actually reduce risk. What it's trying to do, stop people doing, is putting a massive bet on something and walking a long way down the road before they discover it was the wrong thing to do. Going back to that small batch, little and often. So what we're trying to do here is break everything down into smaller pieces of work, and every time we do something, ask ourselves the GRC questions, make sure we've complied with anything that we should have done. And I keep on using that acronym GRC. They're often a separate team, and again, this is if we talk about, we've talked a bit about organizational design, but let's talk about culture design as well. If we're trying to design a culture that allows us to react to the market quickly and safely, we need to be able to collaborate across all teams, and that includes GRC. So we need that those GRC people to come close to us, to be involved in the product backlog, to make their requirements a non-functional requirement that is understood by the development team that are going to deliver the enhancement to the product or service. So we have that concept of continuous compliance.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into step 3. We've talked about the first 2 steps, the value stream thinking, mapping the value stream. Now we got to actually put this into practice, and where the rubber hits the road is, well, getting your tool chain in place. So with that, I think we have to talk about this topic we've hit a number of times, which I love, the value cycle. Tell us, what is this value cycle thing?
I had a bit of an aha moment delivering a presentation many years ago now, and I had a classic software development life cycle, step, linear A to B on my slide, and I'd very cleverly, I thought, kind of assigned which actions belong to dev and which ones belong to ops. And we used to think of these things as completely separate things. IBM's rational department that were involved with the software development lifecycle was completely separate from the WebSphere department, which was all about what happened in the operations and maintenance, right? It was completely separate. And someone in the audience went, well, it doesn't feel very DevOpsy just to kind of have it going left to right and then stopping. And of course, we just used the word continuous. We just talked about continuous compliance, and we talk about continuous integration and continuous delivery and doing things small batch and getting fast feedback and doing experiments and trying it again and again. So actually thinking of things as a cycle makes a lot more sense. So what we've got here is really a description of the process, but we're going to look at it in a slightly different way in a minute. But where we start is with the idea, right? And the idea will likely be generated from something in the portfolio. It'll be a vision, a goal, or something that somebody wants to do, and then it becomes an epic, a feature, a user story, whatever terminology people use for the fragments, if you like, of their product backlog or their PBIs, their product backlog items. And then we start creating code, and we should be validating it at the same time. So those two are very tight. Then we're delivering the code, so it's released and operated in live, and then we're getting our insights analysis into what's actually happened and whether our experiment has gone the way we thought it would or done something different. And doing something different isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the way. Some people will say there's no such thing as a failed experiment. It's just an experiment and there is an outcome.
Right.
And then we go around again. So whatever we discover should influence what we decide to do next. We go back into that backlog. So it is a cycle, which is one of the problems I have, and I haven't managed to resolve it yet. But when we talk about value streams and the idea of water, running or a river running? Is it kind of like, it needs to be, someone said something the other day on LinkedIn, actually, they called it the value whirlpool, which I kind of loved, and I kind of reached out and said, I like that, and they went, no, it was a bad thing. It was like a chaos whirlpool. And I said, what, more like a plug hole? And they said, yeah, totally like a plug hole, all the value just went totally down the drain. But yeah, we have to kind of think of these streams as more circular than linear, for sure.
We do, and in fact, it no more is this. This is even more noticeable once we start looking at the tool chain itself. So how does the tool chain fit into the value cycle?
So again, in consulting, what I observed was a lot of value stream, a lot of DevOps tool chains being pictorially imagined, again, in a linear way. So people, it's just the way that our brains have learned to do this stuff, and it's just something we're having to come out of. But we just looked at that value stream cycle, starting with the portfolio and backlog. And of course, we have tools that can layer all over these pieces. So actually, you know, the picky people in the audience might be going, well, you know, the JIRA items that we've got in the middle there, that should be out of portfolio and backlog. But you have a similar flow. So we've got assets being kept in an artifact repository like Artifactory, which is the example we've got there. Then we're doing things like version control. Then we're getting into our CI/CD service and doing. Then we've got Jenkins there. Then we've got testing. We've got if we take a classic definition of continuous integration, we'll say that every developer is committing code at least daily to trunk, and we're doing 3 tests: a unit test, an integration test, and a user acceptance test. You can see NUnit, Jasmine, and Selenium there satisfying those testing requirements. And then we've got Sonatype Nexus Lifecycle, because we're starting to think about security testing. You know, this is quite a high level of capability for an organization to be doing all of that testing at this point in their lifecycle. But we've now gone into our continuous delivery piece. So this is where we're starting to coordinate the release, doing ticketing through our service desk, and then gathering the insights and analysis. And here we've got examples of Splunk, MuleSoft, and Grafana as tools that are going to give us that analysis, to give us that insight, to help us know what to put next into our backlog. So the DevOps toolchain essentially layers over the value cycle, but I don't think that many organizations are thinking of it this way at the moment. I can immediately think of one example of one organization that layered tools over process, but it's not a common thing that people do, I think, is it, at the moment, Jeff?
It's not, and until you start thinking about how do I bring all this stuff together, as soon as you start thinking I want to answer some of the critical problems that I see in my process, and think from a systems kind of thinking, you don't think about the tools and the fact that you need to seamlessly integrate. How do you you know, show transparency in teams? Whatever you do, you've got to be in a way that is seamless. It's got to be transparent. It's got to be automatic. And what I like about this, of course, hey, I'm a value stream management vendor. This is what we do. We provide the visibility across the tool chains, and not to steal that little bit of thunder in the future, but that's the point. You need some way to connect all these things together so you can see what's going on. We better move along, and I think we have another poll.
All right, folks, let's move to our second poll. And the question is, which of these metrics can you extract real time from your DevOps toolchain? Answer number 1 is deployment frequency, followed by flow efficiency, cycle time, which includes from idea to value realization, lead time, which is from code commit to production, and story points delivered, aka velocity. All right, folks, we're going to give you a couple of seconds to think that through for a minute, and then we'll get our responses together. And all right, let's see what we got for answers now. And here we go.
Wow, these are good.
All right, our answers are deployment frequency is at 65%, followed by story points delivered, aka velocity, at 41%. Closely behind that is lead time from code commit to production, 38%. Then we have cycle time from idea to value realization, and flow efficiency comes in last at 21%.
Interesting. So you remember earlier that I was talking about the evolution of the DevOps toolchain and how it kind of started as an experimental thing in many cases in development teams. Very rarely architected as an end-to-end thing in the way that we just showed you. And I think what that means for us in terms of where we are in terms of people's capability to access metrics is we're quite point driven still. So what we're seeing here is we actually have some people may have noticed we've got some of the DORA metrics. So deployment frequency, which is our top scoring one here, is what we call a DORA metric, so one of the 4 top DevOps metrics. And it's a really important one when you're on a DevOps journey, but I will say a couple of things about it. It is a point metric, and what I mean by that is you can access it just from one tool, and it tells us one thing. It's also a metric that becomes much less interesting as people become more DevOps capable. So when you're deploying once every 3 months, working towards deploying once every 2 weeks is obviously quite a dramatic difference, but moving to a place where you're deploying 6 times a day instead of 3 times a day, or you've got the ability to do it whenever you want without really worrying about it, is that becomes a much less interesting metric. The lead time one we've got here as well, and this definition is a DORA definition, so from code commit to production, is a fairly simple one to get from a single tool, usually your CI tool, and again tells us a bit, but it's not end to end. And then the velocity one, I'm actually surprised we've only got 41% doing that. It may be to do with the profile of the audience we've got today, but it's a fairly standard agile metric to get. But the two that we're really interested in, I think, Jeff, no surprise, the flow metric, cycle time, and the flow efficiency are the lowest. But as your reaction, I think you were pleased to see these so high in this particular poll. Did I read that right?
I am. I think that's a good thing. I think we need to start thinking about this problem from idea to production, which is why you think, it covers all the tools. How long does it take to get an idea from the point in time that we said, let's do it, to get it into customers' hands? So often we think of success as, well, we built something, we didn't blow up production, great, that's awesome. Don't get me wrong, that's a really good metric to have. But why don't we start thinking about how do we get value in the customer's hands? How do we, not how many keystrokes did we do, but how many or how big the feature was, but really how much value did it deliver? Well, lots of stories. I still remember some of the simple features that I've delivered that have had some of the greatest impact to the business across my career, and some were really quite simple and had massive impact. Anyways, we better hit the next set of thinking here, which is the next step in the process, which is, well, once you're extracting these metrics and value points and understanding some of the value stream metrics of delivery, you need to start extracting insights from that to know what it really means to your journey. And I guess as we think about that, well, let's just talk about some of these metrics that are here. Do you want to talk about what lead time versus cycle time, some of the DevOps metrics and what they mean? Give us some of your insights of some of the common things you see here.
Well, lead time and cycle time means different things to different people that come from different backgrounds. It's a bit like release and deploy, or deploy and release. And, organizations need to work together really to almost create like their own glossary. This is what we mean in our organization when we say lead time. And, you and I talk about this such a lot, but the definition we had in the poll for lead time was actually from code commit to production. When we do value stream mapping, we quite often talk about cycle time being the end to end from when the idea is had to when it is delivered to the customer as well. But there are other points in the process that you can measure. So you can start from when an idea is had, but when is that? Is it when it goes into portfolio management? Is it when it goes into the product backlog? Is it when a project plan is created or a requirements document is created? When does that idea start? Or is it, are we going to count when it goes into the sprint backlog, or as in the previous example, as we start no, not in the previous example, but we could do it from when we start work on it from a coding perspective. And then the previous example was actually doing it from code commit. So there's all these different ways that we can measure it, but whichever one you use, and I'm kind of interested in companies that do all of those ways, or at least have the ability to do all of those ways, because the whole point of measuring it is to find a way to improve it. So we need to know what it is in order to know whether we've improved it. And you and I always laugh about this, Peter Drucker's quote, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Of course you can improve it, but how would you ever know if you didn't have the data? So yeah, that was a bit of a burble about the cycle time and lead time, but I guess you have this experience as well as a product manager for your organization. You know, how do you pick which metrics to provide to your customers?
Well, and that is the interesting point, is there's no right answer. Don't just take a look at a set of metrics and say, let's improve all of them. That's, you know, that's boiling the ocean. You've got to pick where your core problems are. Are you not delivering value fast enough? Well, start looking at the areas where you're going to look at the lead time of idea to production to figure out what does that look like. Figure out where the bottlenecks are in that process. Are you slow because quality is hitting you? Well, then start looking at some of your stability metrics of MTTR and your change failure rate and figuring out what you can do there. There's prescribed processes for these. Ours, as we've been going through this journey ourselves, I mean, we've been looking at our own MTTR. What's our outage rates? What are our problems that we're having in our deployment frequency, and what is the stability of that for ourselves? I mean, this is the classic things of things you look at it. And you know, what's fun about this is as you have these metrics, don't use them against people, because people will try to game them. Use them back in when you're doing your value stream mapping exercise to get the teams enabled to run experiments to fix them, which, you know, kind of takes us to the next step of, you know, boy, when I hear about a deployment frequency being, you know, well, we deploy once every 6 months, I hope for everyone there's like ding, ding, ding little lights that are going off saying that, you know, that might be a problem, because that means it's a much larger set of deployments. So when you hear about deployment frequency and having a relationship to stability, what does it make you think?
It makes me recall doing some workshops with a bank and getting teams of people to, on a flip chart, rate themselves across those 4 metrics we were talking about. So we'll talk about them, not quite the ones on the previous slide, but we'll talk about those DORA metrics. So we'll talk about the throughput metrics, deployment frequency, and lead time, and then the stability metrics, change fail rate and MTTR. And there's 2 I'm particularly interested in or remembering, and one is the change fail rate and the deployment frequency. So this particular bank really proud that their change fail rate really, really low. They hardly ever get any changes failed, but the deployment frequency is also really low. It's like, well, what are you actually doing all day? It's like, it's great you're not breaking anything, but if you're not delivering any new value to your customers, it's just like everything's just going, plodding along in the same old way that it always has, which is fine, apart from there's Monzo and the Starling Bank, and there are competitors out there that are offering customers a service where they can open a bank account online and push money around and go out to dinner and share the bill with their friend that sat next to them. You know, these companies need to be able to change fast. So we do need to use these metrics together. And I think I gave an example the other day of one where I had a team, and there's this misuse of metrics. It's almost like metrics abuse that happens in organizations. One example of that is when leaders use them to beat teams up, right? So the whole point of metrics is there for improvement. Teams should be allowed to discover which metrics are working for them at any point in time, and allowed to experiment with new metrics and use metrics to drive the experiments that they want to do, not to be beaten over the head and not given a bonus because they didn't get their deployment frequency up to 5 a week by the end of November. That's not what they're for. And then the other misuse is things like, and this is related, I saw an organization that had a KPI around deployment frequency, but they didn't have the partner metric around change fail rate. So the development team wanted to increase their deployment frequency to get a good report on their KPI for that, but they noticed that the testing team were bringing them down. So they basically decoupled in the sprint the developing and the testing efforts. And even though they'd co-located the team, they effectively then went into parallelized sprints, basically so the dev team could kind of control their own deployment rate and let the testing and stuff work out later. And it you know, oversimplified some of the story, but we've got to be careful how we use this. This is powerful stuff, this data.
That's like the Dilbert of when they're paid per bug that they find, and I think it was Wally that said that he's going to write himself a new minivan. That was the goal. If you want to increase your velocity, just well, increase your estimates, and by default do the same amount of work, and everything's better. There's danger in doing that. I think we have another poll, by the way.
We do, and here comes the poll now, folks, the last of the three. And the question is, how do you measure your success? Please select 1, we don't. Number 2 is we use value stream management tooling. Number 3 is we pull reports from multiple tools. We use customer impacting metrics like NPS, referrals, and feature. And then finally, other. Put your answer in the chat box if you're so inclined. All right, guys, we're going to wait about 20 seconds or so to see if everybody votes, and then we'll get together here with some of the answers as we go forward. And let's see if we are ready. All right, here we go. All right, our answers are, the top answer is 36%. We pull reports from multiple tools, followed not fairly closely by we use customer impacting metrics like NPS, referrals, and feature at 30%. And then a whopping 28% said we don't. And then that brings us down to other at 6%, but nobody picked we use value stream management tooling. Guys, back to you.
Well, not surprising. That's why value stream management is so new. What I really think is fun is if you look at the goal of what the reports are that are being pulled from multiple tools, usually it's some of these standard metrics. Hey, you know, did you blow up production? How many defects escaped? What was my downtime? And the majority of people that we talk to are still not really looking at value delivery. So I find that fascinating because we're still looking at, well, did we explode things, or did I show that I pressed a bunch of keys for my team and delivered something? I find that fascinating. I also find it fascinating that we don't look at any results, meaning we're not really measuring the results. And it's not a critique. It's really hard, and it's an investment to go pull that, but then we're not actually looking or managing the value that's flowing through our system, and it's a significant investment, and there's more opportunities of things we could do. What are your thoughts here, Helen?
First of all, that the 6% that said other haven't put their answers in the chat box, so I'd love it if they could. Second of all, I just want to recap actually on the steps that we've been talking about. So step 1 was identify your value stream. So find out where that long-lived product or feature is that is delivering value to your customer. Step 2 was map that value stream. And people that have been here from the start will remember that we recommended value stream mapping as a tool that everyone should use at the start of their DevOps journey. And we didn't say this explicitly, but I'm going to say it now, and repeatedly through their DevOps journey. So you want to know what that cycle time is of your product or service, and you want to improve it. You want to get value quicker and quicker and quicker to your customer. But there is a problem. Value stream mapping is expensive to do. It's expensive and time consuming in terms of the amount of people that are involved. And as much as consultants will encourage organizations to repeat their value stream mapping exercises, it often doesn't happen. The other big problem with value stream mapping, it is human oriented. And human driven, and there are great advantages of that in terms of learning to collaborate, learning about each other's work, helping each other change things around our work and making it more useful. So, sorry, not yet, thanks Jade. So it is very human oriented value stream mapping, but not data oriented. And we just said that data is a really, really powerful thing.
Right.
And what we want is data-driven conversations, and we've got those tools. We showed you how a value stream cycle fits on our DevOps toolchain. So that 36% of people that said we pull reports from multiple tools, what they are doing is they're in that stage where they've built a fragmented toolchain, and they're now putting a skin or a dashboard over the top and dragging bits off each tool. What they're not understanding is the end-to-end value stream. And this, just to be really explicit about it, this is what value stream management tooling does. It connects your DevOps toolchain so that you can get proper insights and have data-driven conversations about what your value stream map looks like real time at any point in the day.
That's precisely it, which kind of takes us to our next point. You know, if the only time you're looking at your tooling and pulling the reports is at the end of the cycle, you're missing an opportunity. So that takes us to, well, let's why don't we do it continuously? So this takes it, you know, the whole point of value stream management. There's a question is, how is value stream management different than regular agile teams, or is it more just, you know, new terminology? And it's like, well, no, this is a layer on top. So tell us about implementing this as an improvement framework.
Just want to go back to that question just for a second, if that's okay. So like the difference between Agile and value stream management. So Agile is a software development methodology at its core. That's where it started. And it does talk about being product focused, so having product backlogs. But we have an entire movement called DevOps because there was a problem in that software development teams were embracing Agile, and our IT operations teams had no idea what was going on. They hadn't been invited to the party, and it created huge amounts of conflict. So for 10 years, we've had a movement called DevOps, which has been trying to right that Agile boat, if you like, and bring those ops people into the conversation. Increasingly emerging is the idea of scaling Agile across an enterprise. So not just scaling Agile across very large numbers of software engineers, but actually getting enterprise Agile, so getting Agile into the business as well. So we have had examples for quite a long time about marketing teams as a great example, HR teams using Agile principles to manage their own work. But we're now trying to get all of these humans in an organization to work in this way. For me, as somebody that's been through the Agile and DevOps journey, value stream management is the next iteration. I often call it next generation DevOps. I did a talk at All Day DevOps a week or two ago that was titled exactly that, because this is answering a lot of the emerging questions that were coming out of the DevOps world, how to connect these tool chains. Now we understand what an end-to-end DevOps tool chain looks like. How do we connect it all? How do we really have those data-driven conversations? Now that we know how to continually integrate our product, how do we understand what the flow of the work looks like, and more importantly, the flow of the value? So to get back to this slide here, what we're really focusing on now that we do understand flow and cycle times is the improvement of those flows and cycle times. But most people don't practice continuous improvement as a habit. They have often continuous improvement departments, which is, it's an anathema. It's a bit like having an innovation department. It's like, okay, so they're the only people that are allowed to innovate, right? The innovation department.
Right.
So this slide is really just giving the audience an example of a way that you can learn to practice continuous improvement as a daily habit. It's another lean tool. It's called the Improvement Carter. Michelle, one of our colleagues, asked us the other day, she was like, why are the numbers all jumbled up? And it's because we've got a timeline, but the order in which we do things is we start at number 1, so we understand our long-term vision. Then we go to our current state, where we are today. Then we go to step 3, so we understand what our next target state looks like. And then we do number 4, which is what you call it, the PDCA, or the Plan, Do, Check, Act, or the Deming cycle, which is basically an experiment. And what we do is we do this with all of our work. So anytime we're thinking of doing something, we check it against the Improvement Carter. The word Carter, anybody that's a martial artist will know, because if you train to do martial arts, you train to do the same thing over and over again. So you basically gain automaticity in your brain, and you gain muscle memory around it, and it becomes a habit. So the idea is that you use this process over and over and over until it becomes just a natural way of working for you.
Absolutely. We are running out of time. I better slide through a couple things here.
Yeah.
part of the process is that, you know, you want to incorporate this in your value cycle. I wanted to make sure too we hit you know, some points on improvement framework. Sounds like we're going to need to spend more time there, but there's a lot here on what to do as part of your improvement framework. Let me hit a couple other quick points just because we're here, and then we'll have some time for questions. But the point of value stream management is to help manage this. It sits as a layer above your tooling that can capture these agile and DevOps principles in the tooling itself to help you with that inspection. You can see these individual value streams as they flow through, regardless of their methodology, and give you the insight so you can continually inspect what's going on. Well, you know, hey, I make no bones about it. I'm a vendor. I come here with a value stream management platform. We're a cloud-based solution that helps you do exactly this. We connect into the tooling that's there across the entire process, if you will. I like to think about or I like to describe our platform as a 3-layer platform. The first layer actually connects into your tool chain and normalizes the data that you see there, normalizes all the different teams that are doing planning into a single area that can demonstrate what is being worked on, normalizes the statuses, normalize the types and so forth, and really help make the data flow from tool to tool, make your entire tool chain seem as one. And that's the point. It doesn't matter if a person's working in Jira or if they're working in the service desk, and all that data should come together. Well, the next layer is really about the management orchestration, help the workflow and the processes of how do you deal with the release trains, how do you deal with the environments that are being provisioned, and how do you deal with the deployment processes. There's a number of others that actually aggregate onto this. I want to now schedule deployments going out to lower level environments. How do I get the approvals? All of those are some of the types of things that we manage as part of our platform. Will help you through this. If you don't know where to start on your journey, for example, one of the easiest ways is to jump all over the environments. Think of how hard it is to provision and request environments today. If it's taking any longer than, you know, it's already done in minutes, please, there's tools for this to help this process so you can manage this journey. The third layer of our platform really deals with the analytics, and the analytics give you a way to have insights at any point in time. Since the data is already flowing, at any point in time, you can look at a real-time live dashboard for various roles. If you're in a release management organization, we can help you with that instantly to see insights of tracing features from place to place, to see which user stories are coming in late that need to be scrutinized or help manage the risk of various releases. If you're an environment management team and you're trying to understand the time it takes to provision, or which environment's being used, which environments have conflicts, what's your utilization, what environment's going to shut down, we can help you with that. If you're managing a cutover and go live, we can help you with insights of how the progress of a particular go live event is happening. If you're looking at it from a high level and you want to see the overall value stream metrics of what is my time from idea to production, you want to see if I'm improving team to team, which methodologies work better in your organization, that's precisely what we do. And so we're excited about this as a platform because it gives you some capabilities you haven't had before. Not that you don't have this data, because you're already pulling it from multiple tools. We just pull it all the time and help you manage it. So just to talk, this is the fourth of a webinar in a 4-part series. We do have 3 other webinars we've done. They're available on demand. You can get the slides to this. I think we're running out of time here, but let me hit if there's any questions. We got 2 minutes for questions.
Do they need to do Amazon gift cards?
Yeah, I think we are out of time because we do have to do the gift cards. So I want to thank Jeff and Helen for sharing their expertise. Our winners of the gift cards are Beverly K, Javier C, Michelle G, Susan E. Everybody who won, check your email for those gift cards. I want to thank you all for spending some time with us. Encourage you to come back and check out the other webinars from our guests and hosts today. And with that, guys, have a great day and be safe.
Thank you. Bye for now.